Stegosaurus is one of the most famous types of dinosaur. They lived during the Late Jurassic period, and fossils under this genus have been found from the western United States to all the way over in Portugal. These animals are fairly distinctive due to the plates on their back, as well as the thagomizer, which is the spiked tail that they used as a defensive weapon. They were first identified during the Bone Wars by Othniel Charles Marsh at Dinosaur Ridge, and they're one of several species of dinosaur that even non-dinosaur fans will typically recognize, right up there with the likes of Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus, even though those two species actually lived during the late Cretaceous. But in any event, Stegosaurus is rather famous. But also, a prevalent fact about them that has been consistently shared over the years is that they were obscenely stupid. Just dumb. Just so dumb. Look at him. But the truth is, like many things, that's probably not quite right. As further research has shown, that Stegosaurs, while they weren't necessarily geniuses by any stretch of the imagination, they were by no means unintelligent to the point of being inept. After all, they lived for millions of years. They couldn't have lasted that long, being a complex organism, without some degree of competent intelligence. But how does a myth like that even get started? Why do people still, to this day, think that stegosaurs are dumb? Well, part of the problem is the stigma that lasted with dinosaurs over most of the 20th century, to be honest. For many years, even those educated in the paleontological community portrayed dinosaurs as big, dumb, dopey lizards, almost too stupid to survive, hence why they went extinct. But for one thing, they were only wiped out by an obscene cataclysmic event that no amount of intelligence could have really adequately prepared most species for. And technically, they aren't exactly extinct since we now know that dinosaurs have more in common with birds than reptiles. They're kind of an evolutionary midpoint. And based on classifications, you could call any species of modern bird a dinosaur, and it would be technically correct. But with stegosaurs in particular, the problem seems to be down to their heads, which, admittedly, are quite small, especially compared to their rather large bodies. If you look at a lot of other famous species of dinosaurs, like again, Triceratops and T-Rex, while they had large bodies like stegosaurs, their heads were also quite big. T-Rex in particular had a massive skull, housing a fairly large brain. The stegosaurs, for one thing, predated both those species by millions of years, and even compared to dinosaurs of their time, their heads are still kinda small. A popular phrase that you might hear surrounding them is that they had a brain the size of a walnut. And that's not true either, at all. Their brains were actually more in line with the size of a dog's. And dogs are fairly smart, but the problem here is proportions. With larger bodies, it's generally understood that they would require more brain power to function, and therefore there'd be less brain available for things like thoughts. There were no thoughts, only leaves. No thoughts, just leaves. But there's a few problems with looking at it this way, and that it's just not always true. We can't necessarily look at the size of an animal's brain compared to their body size and say, this animal was smart or stupid, with any degree of exact certainty. It can be used as a guiding tool, but modern elephants actually have a comparatively small brain to body size ratio, 1 to 560, but elephants are known to be quite intelligent, so clearly there's more to it than just looking at it from a body size to brain size ratio. There are other factors to consider, and other evidence has shown that stegosaurs were obviously capable of thought, at least in terms of survival. For one thing, they lived for millions of years, but also we found evidence of them using the thagomizer to defend themselves. They would have to know to do that, and be fast enough to do it, so they weren't slow, dumpy, stupid lizards at all. The size of a brain is not the only factor when it comes to determining intelligence. Things like folds in the brain are also relevant. Unless we somehow found a preserved imprint of a stegosaur's brain, it's practically impossible to know exactly how complex their brains were. In the modern day, it's still fairly accepted that they weren't the smartest of dinosaurs by any stretch of the imagination, but to be fair, when it comes to herbivores in particular, they're often not super smart. The real thinkers among dinosaurs in general would have been theropods, particularly smaller ones like Troodon. And even the Rex is believed to have been quite intelligent, with a very large brain even for their body size. So just because the ratio of brain size to body size on a stegosaur is on the small end of things, it isn't a guarantee that they were complete idiots. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that for a while, because scientists were so wrapped up in the idea that these animals were just that dumb, it was actually thought that their brains were so small that there's no way they could have been able to survive or even control their bodies. So a theory came about that stegosaurs actually had a second brain, or more accurately, a very dense cluster of nerves located between their hips. Marsh was actually the one to note a large canal in the hip region of the spinal cord that could, in theory, contain 20 times the neurons of their rather small brain. The thought was that this second brain, as it's sometimes called, was used to control most of the rear portion of their bodies, since their super small brain could not at all possibly do that. But beyond the placement of the hips, there's really no evidence to suggest that this was even the case, and that could easily just be space for other internal organs. There's really no basis to even say that a second brain would even be needed at this point when it comes to modern understanding. Though in Marsh's defense, back then, brain size was considered the biggest thing when it came to determining intelligence. So if an animal had a very small brain, it was almost always assumed that they were complete morons, when in reality that is simply just not the case. Again, they have to look at the ratio of brain versus the mass of the body, and even that's not enough to really accurately determine intelligence because you have to factor in brain folds and a whole bunch of other things that go into evolution. The truth is, we probably won't ever know for certain, unless someone clones one, how smart a stegosaur was. Were they geniuses? No. Absolutely not. But dumbest dinosaur ever? Probably not that either. They lived for millions of years. They were smart enough to survive. So I guess the only thing I can say for certainty when it comes to the intelligence of a stegosaur is that they were probably smarter than the average modern flat earther. That's where I'm going with it. And with that, a special thank you to my apex predators, Arthur Roy, Dr. Racist78, and Metal for Life Guy. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.